Kelly Coppola's brilliance, Miles Harrington's envy, Sabrina Veyra's loyalty, Jonas Mercier's corruption, and Detective Rowan Cade's relentless pursuit collided in the chilling story where ambition, betrayal, and greed turned a groundbreaking blueprint into the design of murder. Kelly Coppola had always been a name that carried weight in architectural circles, even though she was still young compared to her rivals. At just 29 years old, she had risen through the ranks with a precision and flair that caught the attention of every investor who came across her work. Her projects weren't simply buildings, they were visions brought to life, blueprints that combined artistry with functionality. Those who knew her said she had a rare ability to see entire structures in her mind before they existed, as if she could step into the future and walk through halls that hadn't yet been built. This gift earned her admiration, but it also created enemies she never fully acknowledged. The project that would change everything was already making headlines before it was even presented. Kelly had been entrusted with designing a luxury housing development that promised to redefine suburban living. The blueprint was unlike anything the firm had ever produced before. Sustainable features, hidden green spaces, and a design so seamless that it felt futuristic. It was her masterpiece, and she treated it as more than just another assignment. For her, it was a statement of who she was, proof of the talent she had been sharpening since her days at design school. But as the presentation date approached, she started to notice things that made her uneasy. Colleagues often lingered around her desk longer than necessary, pretending to ask harmless questions while trying to catch glimpses of her sketches. The office printer jammed one evening, and when Kelly went to clear it, she found half of her draft copies inside, smudged with fingerprints that weren't hers. A confidential email she had sent to herself with project details was mysteriously flagged as read when she knew she hadn't opened it yet. These signs of intrusion weighed heavily on her, and though she shared small suspicions with her closest friend Sabrina Veyra, she kept most of her worries locked inside. Miles Harrington, her colleague and quiet rival, was particularly watchful during those weeks. On the surface, he maintained a calm, professional demeanor, always ready with polite congratulations when Kelly's designs earned praise. But beneath that mask, resentment festered. He had spent years trying to climb to the top of the firm, yet Kelly had arrived and eclipsed him in just a few seasons. Clients requested her specifically, and investors gravitated toward her vision. For Miles, this wasn't simply professional competition, it was humiliation. Though no one knew it yet, his envy would become one of the darkest threads in the unraveling story. Adding to Kelly's troubles was the mysterious figure of Jonas Mercier, a wealthy client tied to her latest project. Jonas was known for pouring money into grand developments, yet whispers about his financial practices followed him everywhere. Rumors suggested he used real estate to funnel funds into hidden accounts, masking deeper corruption. Kelly, meticulous in her work, had stumbled across details that hinted at inflated costs and suspicious approvals buried within the documents she was reviewing. She hadn't yet revealed what she found, but she began marking irregularities in her personal notes, circling figures, and highlighting inconsistencies. If these were true, they had the power to not only ruin Mercier, but to drag down the entire firm. The night before the launch of her blueprint, Kelly left her office later than usual. The cleaning staff recalled her working past midnight, her lamp casting a sharp glow across the drafting table, as she reviewed each detail one last time. She carried her leather-bound sketchbook, the one she never let out of her sight, and tucked it under her arm before heading out. That book contained every stage of the blueprint's evolution, from the first sketches to the final design, along with her private note. To lose it would mean losing months of work, and possibly her entire future. But Kelly never made it home. Her car was found abandoned the next morning in a desolate suburban lot. The driver's seat was neatly adjusted, her purse still inside, but her sketchbook lay torn apart across the passenger seat, pages ripped and scattered as if someone had wanted to erase her work piece by piece. For investigators and friends alike, the scene felt staged, carefully arranged to send a message. Kelly Coppola, the rising star of architecture, had vanished overnight, and the brilliance she carried in her mind had been stolen with her. It was the beginning of a mystery that would draw everyone close to her into suspicion. Her rival, her friend, her client, even strangers who barely knew her name, all would find themselves connected to the disappearance. Yet in that quiet suburban lot, with the morning sun illuminating scraps of blueprints drifting in the wind, one chilling truth lingered. Whoever wanted Kelly gone had studied her just as carefully as she had studied her design. Detective Rowan Cade stepped into Kelly Coppola's apartment just days after her disappearance, his sharp eyes scanning the details most people would overlook. Nothing appeared to be broken or forced open, no signs of struggle or panic. Yet something about the place felt wrong. The desk, usually cluttered with sketches and tracing paper, was unnervingly bare. Her laptop sat in its usual place, but when checked, it had been wiped clean, all files erased. Kelly's meticulous nature made this absence scream louder than any physical evidence. For Cade, it was a warning sign that someone had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. As news of Kelly's disappearance spread, her circle was thrown into chaos. Sabrina Veyra, her closest friend, told investigators that Kelly had been unusually restless in the weeks leading up to the project's unveiling. She had hinted about uncovering something dangerous, something tied to a powerful client who couldn't risk exposure. Sabrina admitted she didn't know the specifics, but remembered Kelly's unease, the way she had locked her sketchbook as if it contained more than design. What Sabrina couldn't shake from her mind was the last time she saw her friend focused, ambitious, but carrying a shadow of fear she didn't speak aloud. Attention quickly turned to Miles Harrington. Security footage revealed him leaving the office just minutes after Kelly on the night she vanished. Though not enough to accuse him, the timing raised suspicion. Investigators dug into his background and found mounting frustrations, years of stalled promotions, ignored pitches, and the bitterness of being overshadowed by Kelly's success. In Cade's experience, envy was a motive that often simmered into violence. But envy alone didn't explain the precision behind the erased laptop or the shredded blueprints left in her car. Someone had thought this through carefully, like drafting a crime with the same discipline used in architecture. Then came the unsettling discoveries of the missing blueprint. A construction worker at a site near the city found a crumpled piece of paper inside a dumpster. At first glance, it looked like a discarded sketch, but closer inspection revealed it matched Kelly's signature style. Days later, another fragment appeared, this time slipped under the door of the firm's office, as if someone wanted it to be found. Each page was damaged, creased, torn, or stained, making the designs unreadable. It seemed deliberate, a slow dismantling of her life's work, one page at a time. Detectives began to wonder if the killer wasn't only trying to hide a crime, but to destroy Kelly's identity through the destruction of her masterpiece. Meanwhile, Jonas Mercier emerged as a figure of interest. As one of the wealthiest men tied to the project, he had invested millions into ensuring it moved forward quickly. But Cade uncovered financial trails that suggested Mercier's fortune wasn't as clean as it appeared. Hidden accounts, inflated invoices, and suspicious transfers pointed to laundering schemes connected directly to construction deals. If Kelly had uncovered these links, she might have been silenced to prevent exposure. Still, no direct evidence tied him to her disappearance. His lawyers were already circling, dismissing questions as rumors, while Mercier himself stayed just out of reach, wrapped in the safety of influence and wealth. The investigation grew heavier when a neighbor reported hearing footsteps outside Kelly's apartment the night she vanished. The sound was described as deliberate, slow, like someone pacing before entering. No one could confirm if it was Kelly or another person. Still, it added another layer of unease, suggesting her disappearance may have begun long before she reached her car. Detective Cade faced a wall of unanswered questions. Who had the technical skill to erase Kelly's digital life so completely? Who had access to her personal sketchbook, and the motive to rip it apart? And why scatter pieces of her blueprints like breadcrumbs if the goal was to erase them? The case teetered on the edge of two realities. Either Kelly had been targeted by powerful forces for what she knew, or the crime was born of jealousy within the very firm she had helped elevate. As days stretched into weeks, pressure mounted from the media, branding it one of the most puzzling disappearances in recent memory. Headlines called it the architect's vanishing. Friends described her as a visionary stolen too soon. Behind the scenes, Cade sensed the threads of something larger, an intricate plan woven with greed, betrayal and ambition. The blueprint she once believed would define her career had become the shadow of her undoing, a symbol investigators couldn't yet decipher. Somewhere in those missing pages, in the erased files and the smudged ink, lay the truth of what had happened to Kelly Coppola. 2 weeks after Kelly Coppola's disappearance, the mystery took a grim and irreversible turn. A group of hikers wandered through a wooded stretch near a half-finished housing development on the edge of the city. At first, they noticed an area of disturbed soil, the ground uneven and darker than the earth around. When curiosity led them closer, they realized what lay beneath was not just dirt, but the outline of something human. Authorities were called immediately, and what they uncovered that day ended all remaining hope that Kelly was still alive. The shallow grave held Kelly's body, bound and left with a level of intention that unsettled even the most seasoned officers. Her hands were tied together with drafting tape, the same kind she often used in her work. It was a chilling choice of restraint, one that blurred the line between her life's passion and the cruelty of her death. Folded tightly into the pocket of her jacket was a piece of her blueprint, dirty, torn and marked with streaks of blood. The symbolism was unmistakable. Whoever had killed her wanted her death to be tied directly to her work. Detective Rowan Cade, standing at the edge of the grave, understood immediately that this was not a random act. The detail, the staging, the incorporation of her professional tools, all spoke of premeditation. Someone had crafted her death, the way she once crafted her designs, step by step, with a vision of the end result. To Cade, this was a murder executed with precision, as though her blueprint had become the foundation for a crime. News of Kelly's death swept across the city, shaking both her personal circle and the architectural industry that had admired her. Sabrina Veyra collapsed upon hearing the confirmation, devastated not only by the loss of her friend, but also by the brutal way she was taken. For Sabrina, the image of Kelly's talent, her laughter and her ambition, would forever be tied to the horror of that shallow grave. Attention quickly shifted back to Jonas Mercier. His financial empire was already under quiet investigation, but Kelly's death added a dangerous urgency. Detectives discovered that the project she was working on had unusually inflated budgets, with funds moving through shell companies tied to Mercier. If Kelly had collected enough evidence, her exposure could have destroyed his empire. But when investigators pressed for more, Mercier's lawyers pushed back, shielding him behind walls of influence. No physical evidence tied him to Kelly's murder, leaving him untouchable for now. Suspicion also clung to Miles Harrington. His resentment toward Kelly had been noted by several colleagues, and whispers of his envy spread rapidly after her death. The forensic team discovered traces of drafting ink embedded into the fibers of his car's passenger seat, the same type of ink Kelly had been using for her design. Miles dismissed it as sabotage, insisting he was being framed, but to investigators, the coincidence was too heavy to ignore. He was close to her, he had motive, and now his belongings carried physical traces of her world. The narrative of Kelly's final hours began to form. She had likely left the office carrying her sketchbook and her final notes, only to be intercepted before reaching home. The restraint with drafting tape and the burial near a construction site suggested the killer had intimate knowledge of her work and her habits. Whoever it was hadn't just wanted her dead, they wanted to send a message. For Detective Cade, one question consumed every thought: why leave the blueprint behind in her jacket? Most killers tried to erase evidence, not plant it. The answer seemed deliberate. The blueprint was no longer just a design, it was a calling card, the very symbol of the crime. It told investigators that her death wasn't just a silencing, it was a performance, staged with the precision of a plan drawn on paper. As the city mourned, Cade dug deeper. Phone records revealed that in the days before her death, Kelly had made multiple late-night calls that never appeared in her usual patterns. Cross-referencing revealed the calls had gone to unlisted numbers connected to real estate firms, linked to Jonas Mercier. At the same time, building permits connected to her final project were rushed through with unusual speed, bypassing checks Kelly had flagged in her notes. These findings pointed to corruption, but without a direct tie to the murder, Cade knew the truth remained buried under layers of power and deception. Still, one thing was certain: Kelly Coppola's death was no accident, no random outburst of violence. It was a carefully orchestrated act. Her murder mapped out like one of her own architectural visions, and whoever had drawn that blueprint of destruction had ensured that every line, every detail carried her name into a darkness she never saw coming. Sabrina Veyra had been sifting through Kelly Coppola's belongings when she stumbled upon something that shifted the entire investigation. Tucked deep inside an old portfolio, hidden beneath layers of practice sketches and color swatches, was a small USB drive sealed in a plastic sleeve. At first, she thought it might have been one of Kelly's backup files for her projects, but when she handed it over to Detective Rowan Cade, it became clear that this was much more than a simple storage device. The drive contained encrypted files labeled with obscure names, but once cracked by the department's digital team, they revealed the final version of Kelly's blueprint. It wasn't just architectural plans. It was annotated with notes written in Kelly's own hand. Bright yellow digital highlights marked unusual transactions, inflated costs, and irregular permit approvals. Beside these notations were short comments that read less like design notes and more like warning. One note in particular caught Cade's attention: "If this goes public, the whole thing collapses." Another read, "Miles doesn't know I've seen it." The files confirmed what Sabrina had feared. Kelly had uncovered a web of corruption. The blueprint itself had been used as a cover for laundering money, with fake costs and hidden investors built into the design of the project. Kelly had pieced together the truth and intended to reveal it. What she didn't realize was that the closer she got to exposing the fraud, the more she placed herself in the crosshairs of those who couldn't afford for her to speak. The revelations tightened the circle of suspects. Jonas Mercier's empire now looked even more compromised, as his financial signature was stamped across many of the flagged entries. Yet Detective Cade couldn't ignore the presence of Miles Harrington in Kelly's note. Her words, "Miles doesn't know," suggested she suspected he was being used or manipulated. Could it be that Miles was just a pawn in a larger scheme, or had he been a willing accomplice all along? As Cade traced the lines of Kelly's annotations, he noticed something chilling. The murder itself mirrored the very precision of the blueprint. The staging of her grave, the placement of the torn pages, and even the choice of tape as a restraint, all seemed to echo the language of architecture. This wasn't simply a killing, it was a crime drafted with intention, mapped like one of Kelly's own projects. Whoever orchestrated it had taken inspiration from her world and turned it against her. Then came the anonymous tip. Phone calls and messages began filtering into the police station, all pointing to clandestine meetings between Jonas Mercier and Miles Harrington in the weeks leading up to Kelly's disappearance. Witnesses claimed to have seen them in quiet restaurants, in parked cars late at night, always careful but never completely invisible. The information was too consistent to dismiss. Cade realized the two men had likely joined forces, using Kelly's talent to further their scheme, until she discovered too much. When she threatened their carefully balanced fraud, they made her blueprint the outline for her destruction. Sabrina, overwhelmed by grief, became both a valuable witness and a symbol of Kelly's voice. She remembered how Kelly had once said that architecture was about control, about shaping the world to match your vision. In a twisted way, her killers had used that same philosophy to erase. They had shaped her death with the same control she once applied to her art. The investigation now had direction, but Cade knew he was stepping into dangerous territory. Mercier's reach extended far beyond the city, and his money could bury evidence as easily as it built skyscrapers. Miles, on the other hand, was vulnerable, an ambitious man who might crumble under pressure. Cade suspected that if anyone would slip, it would be him. The key was tying him directly to Kelly's final hour. As the case deepened, Cade couldn't shake the sense that Kelly had left the USB drive as her last safeguard. She must have known she was in danger, hiding the evidence in hopes that if something happened to her, the truth would still come out. Her foresight had provided investigators with a roadmap, just as carefully crafted as her buildings, and now that roadmap pointed directly at betrayal, greed, and a murder so meticulously planned,
it could only be described as a blueprint brought to life. The city waited, restless and tense, as detectives pieced the puzzle together. It was no longer a question of if Kelly had been murdered for what she knew, but how far her killers had gone to ensure her silence. And as Cade studied the evidence, one truth grew clearer than ever. Kelly Coppola's brilliance had outlived her, leaving behind the very clues that would unravel the men who thought they had buried her forever. The turning point in Kelly Coppola's case came when Detective Rowan Cade obtained surveillance footage from a neglected service road near the construction site, where her body had been found. At first glance, the grainy video seemed unremarkable, mostly empty stretches of road, lit dimly by failing street lamps. But as Cade watched the footage frame by frame, his patience was rewarded. At precisely 11, on the night Kelly disappeared, a car pulled into the frame and parked for several minutes. Though the camera angle was poor, the vehicle was identified as belonging to Miles Harrington. The discovery opened a new floodgate of evidence. When Cade secured a warrant to search Miles's vehicle, what investigators uncovered was damning. In the trunk they found fibers that matched the fabric of Kelly's jacket, along with tiny paper fragments that laboratory analysis confirmed belonged to her torn blueprint. The physical connection tied Miles directly to her final moments, erasing any doubt that he had been involved. His protests of innocence and claims of sabotage now rang hollow, replaced by the undeniable weight of forensic proof. Confronted with the mounting evidence, Miles's facade began to crack. He had always prided himself on control and composure, but in the interrogation room, the veneer slipped. Detectives watched as frustration and panic overtook him, and finally the truth spilled out. He confessed to his role in Kelly's death, though his words painted a picture of manipulation rather than cold-blooded intent. According to Miles, he had been lured into the scheme by Jonas Mercier, promised wealth and influence if he cooperated. Mercier had positioned him as both an ally and a shield, knowing that suspicion would naturally fall on a jealous colleague. Miles explained how he had followed Kelly on the night of her disappearance, convincing her to step into his car under the pretense of discussing last-minute project details. From there, the plan spiraled into violence. He admitted to binding her with drafting tape and driving her to the construction site, a place that had become symbolic of everything she had uncovered. He claimed Mercier had insisted on leaving pieces of the blueprint with her body, framing the murder as a message to anyone else who might threaten the empire. For Miles, the act was both an execution and a performance, one he could never escape. With his confession secured, Cade sought to bring Mercier into custody. But Mercier was a man who had built his life on staying one step ahead. By the time warrants were issued and investigators moved to seize him, he had already vanished. Flights, financial withdrawals and border crossings suggested a carefully orchestrated escape, one likely planned long before Miles was ever arrested. Cade realized Mercier had treated Miles as disposable, a convenient scapegoat to absorb the consequences, while he disappeared into the shadows with his fortune intact. The trial of Miles Harrington drew enormous public attention. Prosecutors painted him as the embodiment of ambition twisted by envy and greed, a man willing to trade morality for the illusion of success. The jury deliberated for only a short time before delivering its verdict. Guilty of murder in the first degree. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Miles broke down in open court, his earlier arrogance replaced by the hollow despair of a man who realized he had been nothing more than a pawn. Though justice had been served against Miles, the specter of Jonas Mercier remained. His absence loomed like a shadow over the proceedings, a reminder that the true architect of Kelly's downfall had yet to be caught. Interpol notices and financial investigations continued, but Mercier's trail grew colder with each passing month. For the public, his escape was both enraging and haunting, fueling speculation about how deep his connections ran and how far his influence stretched. Kelly Coppola's story, however, did not end in silence. Her unfinished blueprint was recovered from the encrypted files she had hidden, and a group of independent architects dedicated themselves to completing it. They treated the project not just as a design but as a memorial, ensuring that her vision would live on despite the tragedy. When the development was finally unveiled years later, it bore her name as a permanent tribute to the brilliance and courage she displayed. The case became known as the Blueprint Murder, a chilling reminder of how ambition and corruption can intertwine to create destruction. Kelly's death stood as both a tragedy and a warning, her life's work twisted into the design of her own downfall. Yet in the end, her voice endured, carried through the very plans her killers tried to destroy, leaving a legacy stronger than the betrayal that ended her life.